Gus T. Renegade and Justice in for another program to share constructive information on the system of racism, white supremacy. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into the program. I hope you get constructive information. I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to do the program today. Fortunate to have a guest on the program whose work had a huge influence on my understanding of racism, white supremacy, back when I was very confused about what's happening on the planet and who is to blame for what is happening on the planet. I think the first book that I read of his was Decolonizing the African Mind, and just fantastic reading. It's one of my top books all time. I would highly recommend it to any non-white people anywhere on the planet to help their understanding of white supremacy. Then read The Rest and the West and the Rest of Us. Again, just incredible information. It really helped me get a very clear picture of exactly what the problem is, and that problem is white people. Again, as I said, super privileged to have him on the program to discuss his work, hear information about what's going on in Libya, and hopefully more folks will check out some of his writing. It's just, as I said, I cannot recognize it enough for how it helped my clarity and becoming less confused. Joining us live from Ghana, Dr. Chinweizu. Dr. Chinweizu, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Thank you so much for sharing a bit of your time with us. We are really grateful for the opportunity to hear some of your views. I know some of my listeners that are in the States, this might be their first time hearing from you. Could you give them just a little bit of background information so they'll have a better idea of who you are and the work that you do?
My name is Chinweizu. I'm a Nigerian, and I'm what we call a Black Power Pan-Africanist. And my concern is with getting Black people to understand their situation in the world and where they are heading and what they have to do if they intend to survive in the world as it is. So Black Power Pan-Africanism goes back to Ghaddafi and takes its bearings from what Ghaddafi taught us about our place in the world and what we must do. This is a brand of Pan-Africanism that is diametrically opposed to continentalist Pan-Africanism that Nkrumah sponsored, that has kept us backward for the last 50 years. Well, what I do most of the time is to write things that challenge the conditions in which we are, and also to help to liberate us from continentalist Pan-Africanism and its mindset. We talk of liberation from imperialism and all that, but we also need to get back to the point of liberating ourselves from our own dogmas, doctrines that have not helped us, have worsened our situation over the last 50 years. And this is one of my concerns, that we begin to understand why we've not made any progress in the last, any measurable or useful progress in the last 50 years. And some of the reasons have to do with our own mentality, the ideas we have adopted and treat as sacred, that we all need to re-examine and criticize and find ways to improve upon. Thank you.
Wow. I want to try to cover as much material as we can in the time that we have you. This program, the context of white supremacy, I have unfortunately concluded that we are in a global system of racism, white supremacy. I use those two terms as synonyms, and I use the same definition for both terms. That definition is as follows: a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Do you believe that such a system exists, and do you think that definition is accurate?
Well, I'll have to reflect on that definition. But I think off the bat, I would say yes. There is a system that for the last 500 years at least has approached the world with the view that the whites, particularly those of Europe, should dominate the world, to conquer and exploit the world, and turn the rest of humanity into its servants and slaves. And it has done so literally. Physical, mental, economic slaves, political slaves, and that has been the system that was established since Columbus. It has its roots deeper than that, but the system finally came into being and attained global extent since the days of Columbus. Of course, that's the European side of it, but there is also an Arab side of it, which did not establish a global domination the way that Europeans did. But the Arab side of it also believes in conquering the whole world, which is what the whole issue of jihad is about. Everybody who is not subjugated to the Arabs is regarded as fair game for war. So they talk of Islam as being peace, but it's only peace among the converts, the conquered who have been converted to Arab domination through the religion of Islam. Everybody else is outside the pale and is a target for jihad, which is a war of conquest. So there is an Arab side of the white supremacy game, which is even older than that of the Europeans. And then there is the Europeans' brand of that game, which though younger, has been more successful in that by the end of the 19th century, it had imposed itself on the entire globe, whereas the Arabs had not succeeded in doing so. And if anything, part of the problems we see today in the war between the Western Europe and its diaspora and the Arabs is a continuation of is derived from the fact that instead of conquering the world through their bringing everybody under the religion of Islam, the Arabs got themselves conquered by the Europeans who took over the entire world. And part of what is going on is their resumption of their drive to reconquer the whole world. Like as they say, tell people they want to Arabize Africa and Islamize America. That's their target. That's the name of their ambition. It has been the ambition since Muhammad. So we've got two sides of the white supremacist game, the Arab side and the European side. And we in Africa are victims of the two of them, not just one.
I was really eager to have you on the program to share your views on the conflict in Libya right now, because I think a lot of the issues that you just touched on, so-called Arabs, and I think I've seen you reference them as white Arabs as well. You say that this conflict in Libya, this is not about liberation of black people. This is not about concern for black people. This is something else entirely. And I wanted you to kind of share your view on what's happening in Libya and how that relates to some of these ideas that are afflicting black people and preventing us from solving this problem of white supremacy.
Well, the struggle in Libya is a war between the Europeans, Western Europe, organized under NATO, and the Arabs. The so-called Arab Spring is part of that general conflict. Libya is one particular battlefront in that war between the Europeans and the Arabs, and both are white peoples. We are not part of the Arabs. We, the black Africans, we are not part of the Arabs. They don't see us as part of themselves, and we, if our heads are correct, will not see us as part of the same team as the Arabs. The Arabs are colonialists and imperialists in Africa. Some of that part of Africa that they now occupy, they invaded and conquered, and they are white settlers from Algeria, from Morocco to Egypt. So when these two enemies of ours, two white peoples, the Arabs and the Europeans, who have invaded, enslaved, conquered, and exploited us for hundreds of years, are fighting a war between themselves, that's none of our business if we are sensible. Our two enemies are at war, and it's none of our business to join with either of them or to support either of them. Our job is to take care of our own business, and we have plenty of that to take care of. But unfortunately, a lot of our leaders and our intellectuals are confused about the basic issues of the world and our basic position in the world, and are busy supporting one side or the other. And I guess the most outrageous is those of our leaders, like those in the AU and a lot of our intelligentsia, who think that the war between the Arabs and the Europeans in Libya is a war between Africa and Europe. It's fundamentally, it is not. In practice, it is not. It's a war between Arabs who have conquered and settled in parts of Africa, and the Europeans who have been their enemies for as long as since the 7th century, when the Arabs broke out of the Arabian Peninsula and overran parts of the Roman Empire, Eastern Roman Empire. Their war has been going on since the 7th century. And this is just another episode in a long war. And it's none of our business. Both of them have enslaved and colonized us and invaded us. So basically, this is a war between the white Arabs and the white Europeans. And it's none of our business as black people. I think that, in short, is my understanding of how the war does not concern us.
I've heard a lot of black people who feel that, what's happening, the conflict in Libya right now, that this, represents concern for black people, that this is about liberating black people in the continent of Africa, and they see this related to their own problems with racism, white supremacy. How is it that so many black people, why do you think so many black people think that, what's happening in Libya, that this is about some concern for black people?
Well, I think they're downright crazy or ignorant or both. For instance, I saw an interview by Cynthia McKinney where she claimed that Libya is in Africa and that the Libyans are black. Now, she's got to be blind or crazy to maintain that Gaddafi is a black man, and that even the people in Benghazi are black people. People who have their eyes open and have no confusion in their heads. When they watch these new television images, will see for themselves that these are not black people; these are white people. So I don't know where they get their confusion from, but I think they are the people that you should ask. Call in Cynthia McKinney and ask her, when did Gaddafi become a black man? Doesn't she have glasses? Can't she see? So we have to start asking our people basic elementary questions. When somebody gets up and says that a white man is a black man, we should either dismiss him outright or put him on the spot. Let him explain how he turns black into white or white into black. So I think they're all crazy and confused. And I don't know their motives. People speculate as to their motives, but I can only offer one clue. For the last 50 years, people have been taught that all of Africa is one, that all the Arab peoples are one. And the greatest criminal in disseminating that idea was Kwame Nkrumah, with his continentalism. He went and married an Arab woman, and 6 months later called the Arabs to a conference of African states and told them that we were now one people. Now, I don't understand the historical basis for that kind of claim, and he never bothered to explain. He just made it an assertion and didn't bother to give his reasons. And when a doctrine has been promoted for 50 years, you'll find a lot of people believing it, just as all kinds of crazy ideas have been propagated. This continentalist Pan-Africanism is one of our deadly ideas that have been internalized by a lot of people, and they can't get around to getting rid of it or to even questioning it. So when you tell us that all the white people settled in Africa are Africans with us, then you're either ignorant of history or deliberately, for some motive of yours, refusing to accept the facts of history. So I think part of the confusion was sowed by Nkrumah with his continentalist Pan-Africanism, which gave rise to the OAU, and from there to the AU, which the black states, the black countries, and the white Arab countries in Africa are locked together as if they are one people with one interest. and one history and one culture and whatever. So people who have been brought up on that idea for 50 years will find it difficult to face up to the reality that we are not one people with the Arabs, even if they are settled in Africa. That a python has come into your compound and taken up position in part of it, and it's raising its offspring there, doesn't make him part of your family. The Arab invaders have taken over 1/3 of our continent and have transferred a huge, but almost 2/3 of their population to Africa. That doesn't make them Africans. Just as all the blacks who have settled in Europe or live in Europe are not Europeans. They may carry European passports, but when it comes to how people are treated, you will know the difference between the genuine Europeans, the whites, and the immigrant blacks who are now living among them. So basically, I think part of the confusion has to be laid at the doors of Kwame Nkrumah for his continentalist doctrine of Pan-Africanism. But even more important is, why haven't people for 50 years criticized and repudiated that doctrine? If something is obviously false, why do people cling to it for so long? Well, here we have to go into the psychology of black people and their hunger to be white. We see it every day. They bleach, they straighten their hair, they try to imitate white culture. As Amos Wilson says, they have a white self-ideal. In their heads, they want to be white people. They see themselves as white people. And if they can't be white people, they want to be near whites or be with them. So this integrationist mentality, I think it has a part to play in all this confusion. Because they don't want to be accused of being racist of excluding the white colonialists and settlers in Africa from anything they do in Africa. So they're eager to include any white person in their organizations and in their concept of who the African is. So if Gaddafi or if the Arabs, the white Arabs, are available, even if they're not available, they try to drag them into our organizations and into our meetings and classify them as the same people as us. And when people do these integrationists, because that's what they basically are, the continentalists are basically integrationists. After 50 years, they believe their own propaganda, and they begin to see the white Arabs as black. And I think that is part of our problem. And of course, there are those who define Gaddafi and the Arabs as part of us because of their money. They throw their money around and they say, they are trying to help us, so they must be part of us. They are one of us. So we've got all kinds of motives that prevent people from acknowledging the reality that their eyes can see. To tell me that Nkrumah's black face and Gaddafi's white face represent the same people shows a high degree of self-confusion and self-delusion. So I think these psychological issues have played a part in this confusion that black people seem to have about the matter of Libya.
Just for our listeners and myself, to your knowledge, has Gaddafi ever referenced himself as being a black person?
Doesn't matter what he says. Open your eyes and see. I don't know that he has said any such thing. All I've heard of is that he put on African clothes and tries to claim that he's part of Africa. And he tries to organize what he calls the African kings and make himself the king of Africa. He wears clothes that have African designs on it. But anybody can do that. A Martian can do that. That doesn't make him an African. And even if he says he's an African, people should just open their eyes and see for themselves whether to believe him or not.
Context of white supremacy. See, I definitely wanted to ask because I've read this portion from your book on the program before, Decolonizing the African Mind. You discuss how white people have used the Nobel Prize, particularly when they give it to a black person. They have used these folks to help continue their domination over black and non-white people worldwide.
Correction, white Europeans. White people include the white Arabs. So if you just say white people, you are confusing us. It's Europe that administers the Nobel Prize. The white Arabs don't administer it. So please, specific.
Oh, okay. No problem with that. Those specific white people that give out this Nobel Prize, even though I think this benefits the entire white collective when this prize goes out, I think it does benefit the whole white team. But you talked about specifically, I think Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Ralph Bunche, some of the other folks who've won this prize, black people who've won this prize, and how this has just been used to refine white domination. Several other black people have won this prize since that time. Do you see this trend continuing when this prize goes out and it being used to support white domination?
First of all, I will refuse to answer that question because you shouldn't be directing it to me. I made that analysis 25 years ago. If you want to follow it up, you have how many scholars do you have teaching and lecturing in schools and universities? You should ask them to follow up the work. I've given an example of how that thing can be verified. What should be done is to ask them to go and do the job, assign it to their students to do the research and come to their conclusions. And if they do so, you'll be sensitizing another generation to these issues. You can't come back to me 25 years later and ask me whether it has been continued. I've moved on to other issues. So I suggest you call some of those people onto your program and assign them to go and get their students to research the matter. That's how groups develop their knowledge and develop their researchers and thinkers. So don't go back to the same people all the time with the same old question that they've dealt with before. So that's my suggestion to you. I've not been following all the recipients. And it's no longer my interest. I'm not interested in that. There are other bigger issues in the world than the Nobel Prize. So please, if you think you want to find out whether they've continued, get some younger people to go and look into the matter and come up with their conclusions. Help thereby to educate them. All right?
Understood. See, I wanted to check to see Justice. I believe she's on the line with us as well. Did you have any other questions that you would like to ask Dr. Chinweizu? If so, I believe your line is open. Go right ahead. Oh, okay. I'm on the wrong line here. I will double check and make sure I have her correctly. Okay, I think I have your line. If you have some questions you would like to ask Dr. Chinweizu, please go right ahead.
Can I be heard now?
Yes, ma'am. We can hear you.
Okay, great. Greetings, Dr. Chinweizu. I have some questions for you. Is there such a thing as a non-white Arab? If so, can you name a few?
Well, the classification of Arabs, once the Arabs came into Africa and into contact with black Africans, they've interbred with black Africans and produced what they recognize as black Arabs and treat as second-class Arabs. People like the Arabs in Sudan, most of the people who call themselves Arabs in Sudan are mixed race people with part Arab and part black African. People like the president of most of the people running Sudan today, Omar Bashir, his predecessor, what's his name again? Anyway, most of the dominant group in ruling Sudan are black, what the Arabs consider black Arabs and regard as inferior Arabs. So there are people who are black Arabs. They consider themselves Arab. They don't consider themselves African. And they're ready to do the dirty work of the white Arabs who are their masters. So there are such people who are black Arabs, and they are part of the confusion. They use them to create confusion among us. Because when you talk about Arab racism and enslavement and colonialism in Sudan, most people in the American diaspora are confused because they see the images and they see these people they would consider black as being called Arabs, and so they get confused. They say, how can these people be Arabs? They are black people from Africa. But they are not. They are black people and they are from Africa, but they are half-caste Arabs. And they identify with the Arabs and are willing to do even more terrible things to other blacks, other black Africans, just to please their white Arab masters. Does that help you?
Yes.
Okay, good.
What do most people in Libya look like?
Most people in Libya, have you been watching your television? You can answer that for yourself if you've been watching. I say it's a question you can answer for yourself if you've been watching the news all these months that these events have been happening. Most Libyans are white people. They are Arabs. They are white Arabs. There are some black Arabs among them.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I finished what you said. Go on with your question.
How do the black people in Libya function in relation to white people?
Well, from what I gather, they are second-class citizens. Some people claim that there are a few high-placed blacks in the Libyan government under Gaddafi. That may be true or not true, but like all the people in North Africa that they overran, the blacks among them identify themselves as Arabs, but they are not given equal rights. They are second-class citizens. In fact, there was, back in the 1960s, there was or 70s, I forget now exactly, but it's in my book, the Decolonizing the African Mind. There was a Zimbabwean who traveled by road through North Africa. And part of his encounter with the blacks there was that one of them, a school teacher, told him he was white. And he laughed at the fellow and said, come on, how can you consider yourself white? Look at your skin color. And the man said, well, that's the way he was brought up. He was brought up to see himself as white. And so we have this deep confusion in the minds of the black who are in Libya, the black Libyans. There are some, but they are not the dominant group in Libya.
What suggestions can you offer to help eliminate racism, white supremacy?
What suggestion for what?
The question was, what suggestions can you offer to help eliminate the system of racism, white supremacy?
So that's a simple but serious project. Racism exists because of power differential between whites and blacks. Racism was visited on the Chinese, if you know your history. The Chinese were treated just like black people were being treated. They used to have signs saying no Chinaman. They used to talk about somebody having a Chinaman's chance in life. Well, the Chinese were treated as an underclass, as with the same racism that we were visited with, until China got powerful. When the Chinese got their act together and liberated themselves from those who tried to conquer them, and then built up their power, all that ended. You no longer hear them talking about having a Chinaman's chance. I think Malcolm X said something about that back in the 60s. But the trouble with us is that we've not bothered to focus on building our power. If you have a powerful country that's as powerful as Japan or China today, racism will disappear. So that is the root cure for racism. Shouting and protesting and all that is all well and good, but it's not going to change the damn thing as long as you remain weak and the whites remain powerful. If you want racism to disappear, put all your energy and your thought into building up black power in the world. if you can create a black superpower somewhere in Africa that has economic clout, that has military clout, that can defend its territory, and that can prevent anybody from coming to Africa and doing whatever they like, then you get the respect you want. And then you'll find that nobody will treat you the way they treat you because of racism. So the bottom line is focus your energy not on all these distractions, but on how to build a black superpower in Africa. This was Gavi's recipe for solving our problem, and he gave this recipe 80 years ago in the 1920s. And our leaders have failed to believe it or to act on it, which is why we're still where we are. So the younger people should set their mind and set their goal that the key project for them is to build up a black superpower in Africa. How they will do it, they will have to work out in concrete details, but that is the only thing that will end racism in the world against black people. Is that clear?
Yeah, you answered my question. I know that racism, white supremacy is a global system. I was just wondering how the system of racism, white supremacy, shows itself in your area of the world known as Nigeria.
It shows itself in much the same way as it shows itself everywhere else. Your leaders, let's start with your leaders. They don't have confidence in themselves, so they go about inviting all these white advisors and experts to tell them things that they should be able to do for themselves. So your government policies are dictated by the IMF, the World Bank, all these development experts, white people who come to give them all this information and mislead them. So at the level of government, it manifests in the policies and the attitudes of our leadership, political, military, or whatever, intellectual leaders. If you invite one of the white people to give a lecture, the place will be full. If you invite some black person who knows even more than that white chap, they will not take an interest. So we react in a way that defers to the whites. People still, and I'm sure that happens in the States, a lot of people go around bleaching themselves, bleaching their skin, especially the women, wearing white people's wigs. They disdain African costume or African hairstyles. This is all part of manifestation of racism, and it is here too as it is, I believe, in the United States and other parts of the world. The white person gets automatic respect anywhere in Africa till tomorrow. The mere fact that they have white skin makes them special people. Even the police will defer to them and not treat them the way they would treat somebody with black skin. So it manifests in all the usual ways everywhere that racism exists. Blacks are seen as at the bottom, the least valuable. The police will be more brutal to the blacks than to the whites, and they have all kinds of special advantages, special economic privileges. I don't know if that helps you get a picture of how it operates here in our own behavior.
What needs to be said or done to decolonize a black person's mind?
What needs to be done to decolonize a black person's mind? Well, you've got to start. And what?
I'll repeat the question. What needs to be said or done to decolonize a black person's mind?
I'll take it in two approaches. First, start with the children. If you train the children from the day they are born to have respect for themselves, to be loyal to the black race, you have a better chance of them not having to decolonize their minds, because you will Africanize their minds from day one. And that is easier than trying to decolonize the mind of somebody who is 25 or 30 or older. So looking towards the future, what we have to find out is what kinds of stories, what kinds of teachings must we give to the babies right from the day they are born? Things like giving them white dolls, which was what Ghaddafi was preaching against back in the 1920s. Showing, and all these images that glorify whites, whether they're on TV or in songs or in plays or movies. We have to insulate our children from these things, because by the time they are 3 or 4, they already see whites as special and privileged and to be obeyed or deferred to. So to prevent the colonization of the mind is a more serious task, and we have to start with the babies from the day they are born. For the older people, it's a large propaganda campaign and educational project to get them to unlearn all the things they have learned in growing up. So you have to give them the right kinds of books, get them to read, get them to interpret what they read from our own point, from the Afrocentric point of view, get to teach them things about the history of black people so that they don't go around with the notion that black people have never done anything significant in the world, because that is part of the propaganda that makes people defer to whites. Teach them what black people have done down through history and why they have failed in the last 2,000 years. You have to also explain that to them as to the reasons why they allowed themselves to be defeated time and time again for the last 2,000 years. And one of the most important things you need to get people to understand is, because there's a fallacious notion that blacks have never contributed anything to civilization. So you have to give them information as to what blacks have done or down through history, from the time of ancient Egypt till today, particularly about black scientists and inventors. Because part of the mentality, falsehood, is that blacks have never invented anything, have not contributed anything significant that anybody should respect. If you get around and show them what they did in ancient Egypt, how they founded civilization, how they created the sciences and taught them to the Greeks, and how they invented a religion that became the prototype for Christianity and Islam, and all the things that these religions took from Egyptian religion. The more people understand these things, these achievements of black societies, not just of black individuals, the more they'll have the self-confidence to resist claims that they're an inferior people. So I think that is what you have to do. Great educational task to decolonize the minds of adults, and an even more important educational task to Africanize the minds of your babies and teach them loyalty to the black race. There's a lot that's going on around them that teaches them disloyalty to the black race, and you have to start very early to teach them that they need to be loyal to the black race. So I think those are the two major tasks for those who want a change in our own mentality.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, you're most welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much, and back to you, Gus.
Context of white supremacy. When you opened the book to the West and the rest of us, you had what I thought, and I still think, incredibly profound passage on how white people treat their dogs better than they treat black people. And you, in fact, mailed me a photograph to kind of drive that point home earlier today. Can you share some of that with our audience?
Well, at the time I was writing The West and the Rest of Us in the early 70s, I was referring specifically to things like the restaurant they had in New York, where the rich take their dogs to dine on food that most people can't afford in the world, and certainly most black people couldn't afford. Well, the picture I sent you is a picture from New Orleans during when they were evacuating people from New Orleans when Katrina hit. And the picture has two components. One is an open truck in which they crowded all kinds of black people and trying to evacuate them. And the other one was a brand new Greyhound bus with air conditioning, in which they passed stray dogs from an animal hospital to evacuate them. So you can see how the black victims of Katrina were being evacuated and how the dogs were being evacuated. And that can tell you the difference between the way they treat their dogs and the way they treat black people. People who used to take their animals to the restaurants were doing so in an individual capacity. The picture I sent you is a matter of state officials carrying out evacuation procedures and carrying out the same mentality and using the same mentality of, well, first-class treatment for the dogs and third-class treatment for blacks. So the statement is still true in this century. It was true in the 1970s when I read The West and the Rest of Us, and it's still true in the 21st century, as illustrated by Katrina evacuation pictures.
I unfortunately agree. White Dog, I'm thinking of White Dog. You folks should check that film out and or read the book.
I'm not hearing you.
Oh, can you hear me, sir?
For a while there, I didn't hear you. You were saying, unfortunately, something, and I didn't hear what you said.
Oh, okay. I said, unfortunately, I agree with you, sir, and that it reminded me of a book and a film titled White Dog that is, it illustrates exactly what you're saying, unfortunately. I read one of your essays, and I thought this was really important. I was hoping you could elaborate on this statement. You wrote, "War is a deadly serious business, not an affair for visionaries. What we, the black race, sorely need and have long lacked are practical, down-to-earth, realistic, and sober generals and leaders. And we are at war. Economic, military, political, ideological, cultural, intellectual, etc., and have been for 2 or more millennia, and have been losing non-stop all that time. Is this and I was hoping you could elaborate on that, and if you think that's an accurate assessment."
It's not an accurate assessment because there are so many things in that passage you're quoting.
I guess particularly the last sentence, that we've been losing nonstop, black people specifically, we've been losing nonstop in this war with white people.
Well, I think it's an accurate assessment down till tomorrow. If you read Chancellor Williams' book on the destruction of black civilization, it becomes clear that we've been losing this war for 6,000 years, and we haven't stopped losing. Even some of our so-called victories turn out to be defeats. And I'll give you an example. Our so-called independence movements did not achieve what they set out to achieve, or what they now claim they achieved. They never achieved independence. So we claimed we were victorious, but in actual fact we were not. By the time the white boys gave you your so-called independence, he had changed the game. And you ended up being not independent, but being self-governing in your prison cells. It was as if we wanted to make a jailbreak and dug a tunnel and started going out, but in the meantime, the jailer had built a new perimeter wall so that when we came up, we were still within the confines of the new prison. So that's what happened with our independence movement. And even though we think we succeeded, we failed. We lost that battle. And the most poignant example of that is the case of South Africa under Mandela. Everybody celebrates Mandela as being victorious in overthrowing apartheid, but in reality he didn't. What he did was substitute black managers of the apartheid state for the white managers. And part of the reason why that is, one way to understand that is that all the economic objectives of the anti-apartheid movement have not been none of them has been fulfilled. The land is still with the whites, the economy is still with the whites, the standard of living of the blacks has not improved. A few blacks have gotten money and position, but most blacks have not. People who at the initial flurry after 1994, they built houses for people and connected electricity and telephone lines, but a few months later they disconnected them. So even though we celebrated their so-called victory, it turned out to have been an empty victory. They didn't win. They won office, but they didn't win power. By the time the white boy handed the offices of state to them, the parliament and the state house and all that, they had put in a new arrangement whereby they couldn't do what they promised the electorate when they were doing the elections in 1994. And there's a very good book, a book which contains a very good description of what happened, how they lost the anti-apartheid war, even though they appear to have been victorious. It's a book by Naomi Klein called The Shock Doctrine, and its chapter 10 is devoted to South Africa and what happened to the so-called liberation movement and why it was a failure, masquerading as a victory. And anyway, even without those details, we should get suspicious if your general says he has defeated the enemy and the enemy are celebrating him and making him a hero and a saint. It should force you to ask, did he really defeat them? Why would they be celebrating their defeat and calling him a hero and giving him all kinds of accolades? That's not how defeated people behave towards those who defeated them. So that should have gotten us suspicious right from the start. But luckily for us, people have investigated the actual victory, and the evidence is quite clear as to how and why they lost and why they refused to acknowledge that they lost the game. So basically, we are still a people who have been losing for 6,000 years. And even our latest triumph was not a victory. So I think on that basis, we can say that it's still an accurate assessment of the situation today, that we've been losing this war nonstop for thousands of years. And even our supposed victories have not been actual victories. At least they've not been as victorious as they claim to be. Is there any other thing you want me to comment on that passage you quoted?
Let's see. I guess specifically because this rings a bell with me in terms of needing practical, down-to-earth, realistic, and sober generals and leaders. I feel that is incredibly important, and I guess if you could comment on why that seems so basic. Why do you think we have lacked these kind of obvious fundamentals in terms of building a structure to combat the system of white supremacy?
Okay, I'll give that a go. Well, first of all, we like to talk about visions and visionaries. Now, I don't trust visions and visionaries. You don't know where they get their visions from. Some get it. If you want visions, some of the easiest way is to go and smoke pot or LSD or mescaline, and you get visions, plenty of visions. Some get their visions from hunger. Some get their visions from God or claim to get it from God. But me, I like to point out the anecdote about two inmates of an insane asylum. One had his vision and declared that God told him he was Napoleon. And the guy in the next bunk said, but I did not. So they got their visions from God knows where and claimed that God told them. So when we have these leaders that are preoccupied with visions or with Nkrumah's vision of a continentalist Pan-African movement, union government, you wonder where he got his vision from, because that vision is not helping us. So what we need are not visionaries, though we keep clamoring for visionaries. We want people who are sensible and down to earth and face up to the fact that war is a continuation of politics. Or the Chinese say, war is politics with blood, with bleeding. Politics is war without bleeding. And in war, you have to be very sober and realistic about your strength, the strength of your enemy, the position of the terrain, and all the factors that come into play in the war. You can't tolerate wishful thinking. And with our visionaries, we have a lot of wishful thinking. And so we have to avoid that kind of leadership and population. We have to start creating in our population a distaste for all these visionaries who go around screaming that they've seen some vision. All these insistence on going to diviners. So many of our leaders go to diviners to find out what to do. And diviners have no special insight into reality. If you want to look at what's happening, you have to look at all the factors, concrete factors in the real life, and then do your serious thinking and analysis. A diviner is just a con man of some kind. And these are the type of people that our leaders go to and come up with all kinds of funny ideas and then try to impose them on us. So what I mean by all that is that we have to change our attitudes to the world, take a more scientific approach to things, and make sure our leaders do the same. So they don't wake up from a confused dream and try to implement policy based on what they saw in the dream. And we have to hold them accountable. And whatever they do, we must criticize them and evaluate them realistically. So that's the only way we can begin to handle our situation seriously. So that's the only elaboration I think I can offer at this point.
Okay. We have, I think, 5 minutes left in the hour. I was hoping I could check the phone lines to see if anyone listening, if they had a quick question for you, if that's acceptable, Dr. Chinweizu.
I didn't hear you. What did you say?
Can you hear me now, sir?
I can hear you now, yeah.
Okay. I said we have a few minutes left in the hour, and I wanted to check the phone lines to see if anyone had a question for you before you exit.
Okay, fine. Do that.
Okay. Let's see. Person that called in from California and person that called in from D.C., did either of you two have a question?
This is D.C. I have a question. In terms of the nation called Ethiopia, and Eritrea broke off from Ethiopia through civil war. In terms of how they dealt with colonization and white supremacy racism, many of Ethiopians that I've met or encountered, they will say, well, they defeated being colonized. So what do you know about how they went about doing that in general, how they managed to defeat the British in terms of colonization? Thank you.
How they managed to defeat what?
Colonization.
Well, that was back in the 19th century, if I remember correctly, when the Europeans were doing what they invading Africa and conquering bits and pieces. The Italians tried to conquer Ethiopia, but the king of Ethiopia at the time, Menelik, did what he had to do. He reorganized his army, reorganized his society, imported the right kind of weaponry, and used that to defeat the Italian army. Most of our other leaders did not do that way, and so they lost and got conquered and colonized. So basically, they had a leadership that knew that it had to fight a war and win, and whatever it had to do to win, it did it. Whatever weaponry it had to find, it went and found it. However it had to reorganize its armed forces, it did so. And that was why it was able to defeat the Italian invasion of Ethiopia in the late 19th century. That is the standard recipe. Whenever you have an invader, you have to make up your mind, do you want victory or you want defeat? And then you plan accordingly and organize yourself accordingly to defeat the enemy. And there's no two ways about it. You can't do it by going to pray to God. That doesn't help you. God will not come down to fight on your side if you are weak. God always manages to be on the side of the stronger group, the stronger army. So if you want God to be on your side, do your own share of the work. Get sensible leaders who will organize the people and their armies in such a way and command the armies in a way that will bring victory. Then God will be on your side. So basically, the Ethiopians were able to do it because they had a good leadership that was nationalistic and knew that it had to win that war and did everything necessary to win the war, including making sure it had the right quantity and caliber of arms. So that's all I know about how the Ethiopians managed to escape being colonized. But that was escaping colonization of one kind. Because they remained economically weak, they became a new colony to other groups like the British. They defeated the Italians militarily, but they didn't defeat the British economically. So Ethiopia, all through, has been a new colony of either the British or later in the 20th century of the Americans, just like everybody else in Black Africa. So yes, they won one war against the colonizers, but the military war, but they did not win the economic war. So that's my comment on Ethiopians and their history of anti-colonialism. Does that help you?
Caller in.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome.
Wow, that. Thank you so much for sharing some of your time with us. I know you said you were having had a little bit of a headache today. I guess before we go, I was just curious if you could give us, do most of the black people that you are around, do they understand that black people are at war with white people? Do they understand that?
No, most people don't understand that. In fact, if you tell them that they have enemies in the world, they look at you with surprise. They don't, because nobody has taught them their colonial history. Nobody has taught them the way the world is structured and the way it operates. All they get is Western propaganda, white people's propaganda about how they are our development partners. People who used to call imperialists and colonialists are now called, they repackage themselves and call themselves development partners. And how do they become development partners? They come to run the economy, have their representatives in your ministries and your schools, and make sure that your country's budget serves their interests rather than that of your people. So there's a lot of ignorance about the fact that we are at war and have been at war for a long time with the white peoples of the world. And that is the fault of our education system, 50 years after independence. The education system does not teach them about colonialism and its effects and how it's operated and who the white people are and how they behave and have behaved all over the world. So this ignorance is the fault of our leaders who have made sure that they continue with colonialist education that glorifies white people. They continue with Christianity that glorifies a white Christ. So people's image of white people is based on wanting to be saved by some white fellow who they are taught is Jesus Christ, their Savior. So there's a lot of this ignorance and confusion about our place in the world and what we need to do about it. That's very unfortunate, but we know the cause of it. It's a compromised black colonialist leadership, the compradors who are running our countries in the interest of the white powers.
I just, again, want to thank you for sharing some of your Saturday evening with us. Your books helped a lot. I was one of those confused folks, and your books helped correct a lot of my confusion. And having you on the program, like I said, we're just super appreciative. And thank you so much for sharing some of your time with us, sir.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Bye-bye.